Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, good wherever you are. I'm your host, That Lit Astro Chick, the channel where we discuss the natal charts of writers, artists, and anyone else that I find interesting. So it looks like I'm going to have to revisit my Nature Boy natal chart because I had the wrong birth date. I will worry about that next month. So I want anybody who has watched that natal chart to know that it will be revisited per the court documents that have his official birth date on them. I just had to go through and find what I could on the internet about his birth date, but his will be revisited. But in the meantime, I wanted to keep this month all about the ladies, and we're going to kick it off by discussing the author Zora Neale Hurston. I read The Eyes Were Watching God in high school. I don't remember much of it, so that means I'm going to have to revisit it again. So per her Wikipedia page, this is the opening paragraph about her. She was an American author, anthropologist, and filmmaker. She portrayed racial struggles in the early 20th century American South and published research on hoodoo. The most popular of her 4 novels is Their Eyes Were Watching God, published in 1937. She also wrote over 50 short stories, essays, and plays. So Zora Neale Hurston, according to her birth date, she was born on January 7th, 1891 in Nottsalugga, Alabama. And the first thing that I noticed is that this would make her a life path 9. So people that have the life path of 9, which is the same life path as I do, they're going to be ruled by Mars. And this is a very critical number because it's going to represent someone who has come from many past lifetimes. It's also, the life path 9 is also known for being incredibly wise because they contain all of the vibrations of the other numbers, the other life paths, but nobody else is going to contain the life path of 9. So that's the reason as to why this number is really important. Is it's in higher octaves. It's going to make somebody very idealistic, very much focused on themselves as well as their inner drive. It's going to make someone who has a very humanitarian approach to life because they are so wise. And I also see other echoes of this that I'll get to in her birth chart in a minute. The downside is that, and this could be a plus or a minus, is that life paths 9s, they could be incredibly, they can be very sexualized because once again, it's ruled by Mars. These are people who could also be very chaotic, who could be very conflict driven, people who might either thrive in chaos or they might be very accepting of instigating chaos into other people's lives. And it is because they do have that 9 warrior energy. So that's the first thing that I noticed is that we're going to be talking about someone who comes from many past lives. Why can't I talk today? The second thing that I noticed is that she is a Capricorn sun, and the sun is at the 17th degree of Capricorn. That breaks down to 8. So the number 8, that's going to be ruled by Saturn. That's going to be heavy Capricorn energy for her. Capricorn in the zodiac, they tend to be represented by the fathers of the zodiac. They deal with 10th house matters. These can be people who could be very hardworking. They could be very sharp. They can be incredibly wise in terms of their business acumen. And what I've also noticed from the Capricorns that I've known in my life, as well as just the general archetype of Capricorn, is that they could have a very difficult life at the very beginning of their lives. And I would say that that's further cemented by the fact that she is a life path 9. So she would be somebody who would be most likely having a lot of disruptions or experiencing a lot of conflict in her life that would later on and echo and become a part of her success. And I think that we would see that based on the novels that she wrote about, which were about male-female relationships. A lot of this had to do with sexuality, so that's very much that 9 energy, as well as novels that specifically pertain to race, because Capricorn in the zodiac, it does deal with the color black. It deals with darker entities because of that Saturn influence. It doesn't, technically speaking, just refer to black people, but it does refer to people who are going to be non-WASPs. These would be people who would be more concerned about race. So that's the first thing that I noticed off top. The other reason as to why I believe that she was from many past lives where she was very wise is because she was a North Node. So as I had said before, for example, with Ann Petrie's chart, she's also a North Node. These people tend to come from many past lives where they have spent some form of seclusion as a way of acquiring wisdom. So these would be people in a previous life, they would have been very much focused on acquiring knowledge, on learning about a lot of different people, a lot of different cultures, because Sagittarius deals with foreign entities as well as with voyages. And in this particular lifetime, her last incarnation, she was to use that knowledge that she had acquired and communicate that out to the masses. And I think that she certainly would be very successful at this because her Pluto is conjunct to her North Node, which is also in Gemini. As I had said before with Ann Petrie's chart, Pluto in Gemini is going to refer to a lot of improvements and advances in terms of communication. So think a lot about phones because Gemini deals with phones. Think about the newspaper, think about letters. So all of those would be going on in terms of Gemini. It also would be a time where there would be a lot of focus on urbanization. And I do believe that Zora Neale Hurston was part of that, was part of the Great Migration to going from the north over into the south. Next thing I noticed is that her moon is conjunct her Venus in Sagittarius. So if her moon and her Venus are going to be conjunct, this means that her mother was most likely very influential in terms of the ways that she viewed her life, the way that she viewed home, as well as the way that she viewed her relationship to others. And it's also interesting because these are both in opposition to her North Node. I don't have the ascendant, so I don't know exactly where her North Node is, but this could have resulted in maybe a lot of blow-ups or upheavals when it came to her love life. This also could have meant that she would have been more focused on challenging her ideas around religion, around freedom, and she would have used that North Node energy in order to communicate that. So I did think that that was very interesting. I do wonder now, looking at this, because her moon is in opposition to her North Node, if she perhaps was born into a lifetime where she had been with the same family before. Her Sun and Mercury are conjunct in the same side as Capricorn, and these are also conjunct to her midheaven. So this would have meant that the energy and the time that she would have spent on her writing, as well as her identity, her ego, as well as the way that her mind works, that would have been really important in the way that she would have earned her living. I think this is also part of her success. Next thing that I noticed, her life, which I believe was the inspiration for Their Eyes Were Watching God. It definitely was something that would have been an inspiration because there would have been a lot of friction with it. And I say that because the positives is that we have her Venus, which is in Sagittarius. It sextiles her Jupiter at the 15th degree of Aquarius. So she could have been somebody where she had a lot of opportunities in order to meet a lot of different people, a lot of people who are going to be very unusual for her in order for her to meet them. And maybe there was a possibility of a question around talent. And I say that because she has her Chiron in Leo, and that is in opposition to her Jupiter in Aquarius. So this would be a lot of people that she would have access to, a lot of people who maybe would have been available to service her in some sort of way. However, her Venus and her moon, since those are conjunct in Sagittarius, those are actually squaring her Mars in Pisces. So when Mars is in Pisces, it's going to refer to someone who puts a lot of their energy not towards elements of the world that are going to be very physical. These are going to be people who might focus more on their sense of compassion, on their creativity. It's not a particularly sexual sign. It is going to be a sign where she would be more focused on her creative projects, maybe on like non-entities or non-physical entities. And this could perhaps cause a clash in terms of the relationships that she was in. So that square to me definitely says that maybe relationships were a place where unfortunately she experienced a lot of sorrow. And she also has her Mars is in opposition to her Saturn, which is in Virgo. So people who have Saturn in Virgo, these are people where they could at some point have to learn how to master building a routine, developing their self-worth, because Virgo is all about worth, as well as developing an appreciation for service. So because her Mars is in opposition to her Saturn, I think that this is something that she really did struggle with in her life. And I say that because Mars in itself in Pisces, it just kind of wants to rest. And then Saturn in Virgo would mean that she would have to master getting a routine down in some sort of way. And I think that this could have been another place of difficulty. I'm also wondering if this could have been why some of her relationships may not have lasted for too long, because once again, her Venus and her Saturn, those two square. And typically speaking, when you have Venus square Saturn in a chart, it's going to refer to someone who will have trouble with their finances. Moon square Saturn, this would result in having more than one marriage, because there's going to be a difference in terms of what she may have been thinking in terms of her emotions as opposed to what she may have needed at that time. But it would have been something that she would have been able to master. And I say that because her sun is trining her Saturn. So over time, she would have been able to get past this, to really master that particular life lesson. In addition, this would give her the drive in order to work more towards her goals, because her Saturn does trine with her midheaven. In addition to that, she also has She has her Uranus, and that looks like it's a semi-sextile to her Saturn. So this would make her someone who would be a very keen communicator in terms of a lot of the ideas that she has. She would be able to explain it, especially when it comes to elements that could be more underground. That could be a lot easier for her to describe, especially with that semi-sextile that she's gotten. And I think that's not all that I want to talk about. Oh, okay. So the last thing that I want to talk about is going to be her Chiron, as well as her. I'll do one of the fixed stars just to close it out. So Chiron is oftentimes going to be referred to as being the wounded warrior. This is going to refer to an aspect of ourselves that we're going to feel is very missing for us, at least naturally. And maybe when we see it embraced in other people, these other people might kind of bother us because we can recognize how it's missing. So she has her Chiron at the second degree of Leo, and Chiron in Leo is going to refer to a missing talent of some sort. So maybe feeling as though she may not have been as recognized for her talent compared to other people who may not have had that Chiron. And the negatives of it is, of course, like Chiron is going to refer to something that could actually harm us in some way, or where we have to make an adjustment to work around it. So, for example, her Uranus in Scorpio, that squares her Chiron. So this could be perhaps a need to be underground with her ideas, even though Uranus is exalted when it's in Scorpio. But there would have been a struggle there as far as being seen, and then the desire to be seen versus the desire to be hidden, especially when it came to new ideas. The other thing I wanted to talk about was that her Mercury squares her Uranus. So this would make her someone who would be probably very funny and very inventive in terms of the way that she thinks. This also could mean that she could have a lot of sudden falling outs with friends. But to get back to her Chiron, her Venus and her Moon, those both trine her Chiron. So she would be somebody where eventually she would have been able to master this and get recognition for her talent. Another very harmonious aspect in her chart is that her Mercury trines her Pluto as well as her Neptune. So this would make her somebody where she would be seen as being very creative and very inspirational, especially when it came to her work. And Mercury trining her Pluto, that would result in a lot of opportunities that would come from people that she knows. So maybe she was a very gifted student at school and she received some support for that. Or she could have been somebody who got a lot of support, especially when it came from people in her neighborhood, maybe siblings, maybe friends, because of that Mercury aspect. And I'm going to close this out because, as I keep on saying on all of these, I want to get a lot faster when it comes to the I do these, because we don't all have all day. So the first thing that I'm going to talk about is, of course, the sex asteroids, because why wouldn't we? All right, so the Bacchus, and this is going to refer to where we might end up being a little bit more loose when we might be a little bit more extra. That is in Scorpio, and it might be in her 11th house. So there was a lot when it came to her sexualities, her collaborations, as well as her partnerships that would have been very integral to her identity. It also could have been something that would have been where she would have been very focused on, specifically when it comes to things that could be social. Another one that I think is interesting is that she has the asteroid Lust. So this refers to actual lust, as well as the asteroid Eros. And those are both conjunct in Sagittarius. And that is actually with her moon. So she could have been somebody to where a lot of her talent, a lot of her desires in life, they were very much fulfilled through her physical needs by getting those needs met. And I think the last one that I'm going to discuss is going to be the asteroid Psyche. This I like to refer to as being the Who Hurt You asteroid. And that is at the 29th degree in Taurus. So I know that at the end of her life, she was somebody who really did struggle with financial security. And I believe she did pass away and she was destitute. So that could have been what that asteroid could have represented, because Taurus deals with stability. And unfortunately, that was something that was missing throughout her life. But I don't want to be here all day. So this concludes the natal chart reading of Zora Neale Hurston. Please make sure to like and subscribe and tune in for the next video.